On December 10th, 2023, the libertarian economist Javier Milei achieved the presidency of the Argentine Republic. As of today, therefore, he has already been in charge of the Argentine government for a period of 100 days. And in politics, it is often said that the first 100 days in office are the time when the most urgent measures are implemented, based on which we must begin to judge their presidency. So what assessment can we make regarding these initial 100 days of Javier Milei's government and its performance? Firstly, it's crucial to grasp Javier Milei's objective in these initial 100 days of government. The goal has been, one, to macroeconomically stabilize the Argentine economy. When Javier Milei reaches the presidency of the Argentine Republic, the country was experiencing out of control and skyrocketing inflation. The origin of that uncontrollable and widespread inflation was a structurally unbalanced public accounts and a central bank that acted as a servant of the treasury, systematically converting its public deficits into money in circulation through the process of monetization. In addition, and with the objective of hiding, not solving, but hiding, the consequences of this strongly inflationary fiscal monetary policy, the Argentine government, prior to Javier Milei, had implemented extensive regulations throughout the economy, including price controls, exchange restrictions, and an official exchange rate that was far from the real exchange rate. These measures were constraining the productive forces of the country and had a detrimental impact on its overall economic performance. The distortions had a significant impact on investment decisions in Argentina, heavily affecting both domestic and foreign savers and leading to major consequences for the economy. Well, the objective is not completely finished, but it is quite advanced, of Javier Milei during these first 100 days of government has been to dismantle this devilish parasitic network that, through the inflationary destruction of the value of the currency, slyly expropriated the hard-earned private wealth of the working class and unsuspecting Argentinians, to enhance and boost the spending capacity of the Argentine state while deliberately suppressing and undermining the country's productive capacity in order to make it fatter and more robust. And what specific actions has Javier Milei taken in these first 100 days of government to dismantle this parasitic network that is causing so much harm and draining valuable resources from the economy? To commence, fiscal measures. One of the primary achievements of Javier Milei in the first 100 days of his government has been the successful attainment of a budget surplus in Argentina, representing the first instance of such an accomplishment since the year 2012. In other terms, spending in excess of what is earned. A fiscal surplus that up to this point has essentially been attained through reductions in spending. In certain instances, nominal reductions in spending, for instance, decreases in discretionary transfers to the provinces, and conversely, and most importantly, by means of actual reductions in spending through its dilution, namely raising specific aspects of public spending like public salaries or public pensions lower than the rate at which prices have risen, thereby mitigating the impact of inflation on the overall budget. There is no nominal reduction in those items, but there is an actual reduction in terms of the purchasing power of the recipients and in relation to their significance to the income of the Argentine state. As the income has grown nominally more than the expenses, both in January and February, the National Public Administration of Argentina has, as we were previously mentioning, achieved a surplus. And the result of that historically atypical budget surplus in Argentina, a surplus not only primary but also financial, that is, even considering interest expenses, the result of that atypical budget surplus in Argentina has been a strong, very strong drop in the country risk in Argentina. Put simply, a noteworthy decrease in the financial cost at which the National Public Administration of Argentina can acquire funding and refinance itself, leading to a significant reduction in expenses. And precisely, the medium-term objective of this fiscal adjustment and the consequent drop in country risk is for the fiscal adjustment to act as a fiscal anchor against inflation. With the budget surplus, on one hand, it is possible to significantly reduce the expectation of issuing new pesos in the future. Until this point, the Argentine government had been printing pesos to finance the government's public deficit. If the government no longer has a public deficit and does not need to issue pesos to finance itself or refinance itself, because in fact, if the risk premium decreases, if the country risk decreases, the Argentine government is interested in refinancing itself in the markets at those lower interest rates. If the Argentine government, thanks to the budget surplus, no longer needs to issue pesos to finance itself or refinance itself, the expectation of issuing new pesos in the future collapses. Not only that, if the budget surplus is maintained, that means the Argentine government is bringing in more pesos than it is putting back into circulation. So it's not just that there is no longer the expectation that the supply of pesos in the future will increase too much. The matter is, if the budget surplus is maintained, the expectation is that the supply of pesos will decrease in the future, which makes the peso a more desirable currency, increases the demand for pesos in relation to its supply, and therefore supports and strengthens the value of the peso in the foreign exchange market. And a supported peso value means, in the medium term, price stability. That is the rationale behind the fiscal anchor that Javier Milei is striving to accomplish, and for which, currently, in his initial 100 days of governance, he has already taken a significant stride by means of the budget surplus. Let's talk now about the monetary policy measures that Javier Milei has taken in his first 100 days in office. The ultimate aim and common goal of all the monetary policy measures that I am going to mention and outline below is the number one: clean up the balance sheet of the Central Bank of the Argentine Republic. When Javier Milei becomes president of Argentina, the balance of the central bank was extremely deteriorated. The net international reserves of the central bank were at one of the most challenging and unfavorable moments in their entire history. It's not that they were low, it's that they were negative. In other words, the short-term debt in dollars of the Central Bank of the Argentine Republic far exceeded the short-term availability of dollars of that central bank. And when I say by a large margin, I mean that it surpassed it by an amount exceeding $10 billion. And that's not even taking into account other short-term liabilities in dollars that the Central Bank of the Argentine Republic had. For instance, the debt involving importers from Argentina, a debt amounting to as much as $50 billion. Well, as I was saying regarding the central bank, Javier Milei has sought to clean up its balance sheet, and he has accomplished this by increasing net reserves, which, even though they are still negative, are much less negative than they were when Milei took office. Right now, net reservations are negative for a value of $4 billion. When Milei came to power, $10 billion in the red. So we are already on course to accomplish a net zero or positive level of reserves. And, on the other hand, they have also cleaned up the balance sheet of the central bank, solving the problem of the central bank's debt with importers. Specifically, what has Milei done? First of all, he devalued the official exchange rate to bring it closer to the market exchange rate and thus reduce the huge exchange rate gap that he found when he took office as president of Argentina. Reducing the exchange rate gap until practically eliminating it, which is the situation we find ourselves in today, 100 days after Milei took office, is not only positive because it brings us closer to exchange rate unification, but also allows us to clean up the financial situation of the central bank. Prior to devaluation, the Central Bank of the Argentine Republic would make a commitment, would be obligated to exchange $1 for 400 pesos. To put it in different terms, for every single dollar that the Central Bank of the Argentine Republic possessed in reserves, it had the capability to nullify 400 pesos of the monetary base, or, if we prefer to comprehend it in that manner, 400 pesos of debt owed by the Central Bank of the Argentine Republic. Well, after devaluing the peso, bringing it closer to its real market exchange rate, with every dollar at the disposal of the central bank, that institution is capable of cancelling, of withdrawing from circulation not 400 pesos, but 800 pesos. So clearly, what devaluation achieves, which is just to align the official exchange rate with the market exchange rate, what devaluation achieves is to significantly increase the assets of the central bank in relation to its liabilities, thereby strengthening its financial position and providing a buffer against economic uncertainties. And in the event that you increase the assets of an entity in relation to its liabilities, what you are essentially doing is recapitalizing that particular entity. Not only that, but also, as we have already mentioned, the Central Bank of the Argentine Republic had an implicit debt that did not appear on the central bank's balance sheet. It had a very large implicit debt with importers in Argentina. I had made a commitment to give them a certain amount of dollars in exchange for receiving 400 pesos per dollar, and I still hadn't provided them with the dollars that the central bank had committed to giving to the importers as per our agreement, in a manner such that the importers had received the public promise of receiving dollars. They had made a commitment to pay dollars to their foreign sellers, but they did not possess dollars because the central bank was not keeping its word. it was not providing them with the dollars it had stated it would provide. When you devalue, you're not only increasing the price in pesos importers have to pay to receive dollars, minimizing the lost unpaid debt represented for the central bank, but also what the central bank did was try to refinance debt it had with importers in the medium term, thus increasing the price in pesos that those importers had to pay to receive the dollars. And he did it by issuing a new type of bonds with a repayment period of over a year, which are the BOPREAL bonds. When placing these bonds, the Central Bank of the Argentine Republic absorbs pesos from circulation and commits to deliver dollars in the future, 2025, 2026, and so on, in such a way that an importer, if they don't have a pressing need to receive the dollars that the central bank had promised to deliver, or if they are able to obtain through other means a line of credit in dollars that they will pay off in the future with the dollars that the Central Bank of the Argentine Republic will deliver later on. In any of these scenarios, what an importer can do is buy these bonds by delivering pesos today and receiving later on in the future the dollars they need either to pay their foreign suppliers or to pay off the line of credit they receive today in dollars in order to pay their foreign suppliers today. With these bonds, thus, not only is the debt that the central bank had with importers regularized, but also that debt is refinanced in the long term, thus exerting less adverse pressure on the exchange rate, thereby achieving a more stable economic environment. If the central bank prints pesos to buy dollars, those pesos that it has printed are subsequently immobilized in these BOPREAL bonds and therefore do not exert negative pressure on prices or the exchange rate in the medium term. And thanks to these two policies that have helped to clean up the balance sheet of the central bank, the devaluation of the peso and the regularization of the debt with importers through the issuance of the BOPREAL bond, what the central bank has achieved is, on the one hand, to reduce the interest rate that it is forced to pay to its short-term creditors, the investors in financial assets of the central bank. At first you had passes and LELIQs, but now it's just passes because the LELIQs have been eliminated. Well, the interest rate that the central bank pays to investors in these short-term financial assets of the central bank, which is a way to immobilize pesos in the short term to prevent them from exerting a negative influence on inflation or the exchange rate, has decreased from 133% in the case of LELIQs or 100% in the case of PACEs to, in both cases, 80% at present. Since the central bank is in a better condition because some of the central bank's short-term liabilities have been refinanced to medium term, the central bank does not need to provide such high interest rates for investors in its short-term debt, which is currently happening, in order to avoid a sudden increase in the value of the dollar, which would further decrease the exchange rate. In other words, since the central bank is more financially stable and has more liquidity, it can pay lower interest rates to its creditors without them fleeing from its debt securities. And by paying lower interest rates, your financial situation also improves because the explosive exponential increase in the financial liabilities of the Central Bank of the Argentine Republic, of the PACEs, has been halted, which therefore reduces the expectation of future monetary supply. And that's why, by the way, the market exchange rate between the peso and the dollar has more or less stabilized with its ups and downs, because there is still a lot of uncertainty about the future of Argentina, but over the last 100 days, the exchange rate has essentially remained stable. And besides, all of the above has also allowed the central bank to have been buying dollars against the issuance of pesos, without that issuance of pesos negatively pressuring the exchange rate and inflation. Therefore, the dollar reserves of the central bank have experienced a substantial increase, nearly reaching $10 billion, and consequently, as previously observed, its net reserves have grown by approximately $6 billion. All that in just 100 days. But what is the medium-term goal of cleaning up the balance sheet of the central bank? Well, as it has already occurred during these initial 100 days, the objective is to stabilize the exchange rate by stabilizing the market exchange rate and adjusting the official exchange rate to bring it closer to the market exchange rate. The plan is to unify both exchange rates so that there is no difference between the official and the market rate. Additionally, the intention is to lift the exchange controls at that moment, enabling Argentinians to buy and sell dollars without any restrictions. Lastly, There is a possibility of dollarizing the economy by closing the central bank of the Argentine Republic. Although this last part, which would be very desirable, we'll see if Milei ends up doing it, or on the other hand, embraces another type of alternative plans, like coexistence between the peso and the dollar. And lastly, the third chapter of intense political activity during these first 100 days of Javier Milei's government has been the chapter of deregulation or liberalization of the economy. On one hand, the government of Javier Milei, just a few days after taking office, approved an executive order that liberalized multiple sectors within the Argentine economy. For instance, it repealed the rent control law, which led to an increase in rental housing supply to record levels, addressing the country's housing needs and contributing to the growth of the rental market. And on the other hand, he wanted to expand even further this liberalizing, deregulating, and privatizing package through the law of bases and starting points for the freedom of Argentinians. A bill that encountered the obstructionist opposition of Congress and that at this point in time has not been approved by the legislative body. Therefore, this third chapter, the one about deregulation and liberalization of the economy, is perhaps the most frustrating chapter within Javier Milei's government action. Because on one hand, the decree of necessity and urgency is approved, although the courts have temporarily suspended part of its application, and its validity hangs by a thread that Congress doesn't end up overturning it, and on the other hand, the law of bases and starting points for the freedom of Argentinians is promoted, and Congress overturns it. In other words, a lot of work has been done and a lot has been achieved in terms of fiscal and monetary matters. In terms of deregulation or liberalization, extensive work has been done, but the accomplishments have been minimal since they are not reliant on the government of Javier Milei, but instead relies on Congress authorizing that deregulation/liberalization, and currently Congress is in a position of obstructionism and unwillingness to move forward. And what is the immediate goal of promoting this deregulation and liberalization of the economy in the short term? Unleash the productive forces of the country to drive a much faster and healthier economic growth than what we have observed and experienced up to this point in time. We have witnessed this phenomenon in the context of rental properties. The rental law has acted as a deterrent for numerous Argentines, discouraging them from listing their properties on the rental market. However, the recent repeal of this law has resulted in an influx of these properties onto the market, thereby enabling their availability for residential or commercial leasing purposes. And so, those productive factors, those properties that can contribute to enriching the economy, have transitioned from being unavailable, as if there were no productive effects, to being already available to commence the process of creating wealth and fostering economic growth. Well, this very same model of unleashing the productive forces that are currently being repressed by regulation, by Argentine legislation, is what Milei is looking for in the medium term by implementing measures to liberalize the economy. So, in the initial 100 days of Javier Milei's government, a highly ambitious and well-directed economic plan has been implemented, which, if it endures over time, will enable Argentina to generate wealth once more. However, that economic plan, extremely ambitious, extremely forceful, extremely comprehensive in the short term, is proving to be extremely tough for numerous sectors of Argentine society. During its initial 100 days in office, the economy of Argentina has also entered into a recession, and the real incomes of numerous Argentines, including workers and pensioners, have experienced a sharp decline, falling even below the level they were at during the previous Peronist administration. Additionally, the already high and unacceptable poverty rates in the country have continued to rise. The reason is straightforward. The fiscal adjustment that has enabled the cleaning up of the budget in the short term has had a contractionary impact on economic activity and on individuals who relied on transfers from the state budget for their livelihood. Simultaneously, the central bank's sanitation, through the adjustment of the official exchange rate to align with the real market exchange rate, has resulted in an inflationary surge, which has diminished the actual earnings and purchasing power of millions of individuals residing in Argentina. And unfortunately, the hindrance of reforms and liberalizations of the Argentine economy has prevented a large part of the country's productive forces from being unleashed, compensating for the previous contractionary effects. All of this is true. The indicators of economic activity have worsened, real incomes have fallen, and poverty has continued to increase. However, even if all of that is true, it would appear extremely deceitful to attribute the responsibility of that bill to Javier Milei's government. All this definite impoverishment of Argentine society which has also been experienced during the initial 100 days of Javier Milei's government, is the direct consequence of having commenced to rectify the imbalances that the previous Peronist government left behind for Javier Milei to address and resolve. Javier Milei is dealing with gigantic macroeconomic imbalances, undeniable and unquestionable, in terms of inflation, public deficit, depreciation and exchange rate mismatch, suppressed inflation in the form of regulations and state controls that distorted productive activity, and so on. And Javier Milei says, we are going to address these imbalances because the Argentine economy is moving towards disaster, towards calamity, towards hyperinflation, towards collapse, towards default. And of course, by taking measures to correct those imbalances, the real economic situation of the country is revealed, and the bills that until now were only latent in the form of those imbalances begin to be paid. But why do we have to pay those bills that are making us poor by paying them to the people from Argentina? Well, because the previous Peronist government left the drawers full of those invoices that now, when paying them to correct the imbalances, are impoverishing the Argentinians. This is akin to having a drunk person on the verge of alcohol poisoning and a doctor says, let's stabilize you and ensure your safety. Cease consuming alcohol, recover from the hangover, and you will be in a good condition afterwards. And when those individuals are experiencing the hangover, the person who was close to alcohol poisoning begins to complain about experiencing immense pain and would prefer to continue drinking in order to evade the hangover. And yes, if you keep giving him alcohol, he won't get a hangover and won't feel pain, but he'll die. And if you take away the alcohol, it will go through a hangover period. Now, why is it going through that hangover period? Well, because previously he got drunk to the point of alcohol poisoning. Well, Javier Milei is not the one who got the economy drunk to the point of alcohol poisoning. He is the doctor who is ensuring that she goes through the hangover period as a necessary stage of stabilization prior to achieving a full and healthy recovery. Of course, if in the medium term all these aforementioned indicators such as poverty rates, economic activity, real incomes, if all these indicators don't improve in the medium term, then we could say that Javier Milei's economic policies have failed, because the goal of his economic policies is for all these indicators to improve in the short term. But the thing is, the first 100 days of government is not when they were going to improve those indicators. It is the time period during which we are endeavoring to stabilize the patient so that once stabilization is accomplished, rampant inflation is halted, public accounts are cleaned up, the exchange rate is readjusted, and the economy is liberalized. When all that happens, the patient can move forward. But it was the Peronist government who got that patient drunk, and therefore the hangover, the pain, the impoverishment that he is suffering right now is a consequence of having given him so much and such bad alcohol for so long. And right now, therefore, the foundations are being laid for a healthy recovery in the future. If the fiscal anchor manages to continue reducing country risk and stabilize prices, if the central bank's cleansing manages to unify the exchange rate and lift the restrictions, and if, in case the Congress stops obstructing it, the liberalization of the economy allows unleashing the country's productive potential, then in the medium term, what we will have is a very significant increase in productive investment within Argentina, an acceleration of economic growth, an increase in the capital stock per worker within the country, an increase in the productivity of Argentine workers as a result of that increase in the capital stock per worker, and ultimately an increase in real wages within Argentina as a result of that increase in productivity. This positive outcome will lead to a stronger and more prosperous economy for Argentina, benefiting both individuals and the nation as a whole. Yet everything that is obvious cannot be achieved in just 100 days. In the span of 100 days, you can only start laying the groundwork for all that to happen in the medium term. And that, laying the groundwork for sustainable and healthy medium-term growth in Argentina, is what the government of Javier Milei has indeed done in its first 100 days.